All right, so this is the main conversation we're going to be having here on the AM show, and it has to do with things that we observe in society and yet we don't talk about. We just look on and things go bad, and then sometimes it may lead to the loss of lives and all of that. Joining us for the conversation this morning, I have the former Tema mayor, who is David Anang, and he was mayor for some time. He's been off the scene. Today, I pulled him out from wherever he's been hiding to join us in the studio. Good morning to you, Mr. Anand. Where have you been hiding since you quit the job or you left the job as Tema mayor?
Thank you. I didn't quit. We lost the election, so I had to. It was more like a contract job, so okay. My contract to lead Tema ended.
Well, at the end of your tenure.
At the end of the tenure, yes. So when we lost the power, I took a job. My background is in agricultural economics. So I took a job with the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture.
Okay.
So I was the coordinator for developing research capacity for West and Central Africa on yam. So I was based in Nigeria for 2 years. Then I came back, and I've been around.
Okay.
Working here and there, and in some. I think I worked for in the cocoa sector for some time. Then I joined the State Enterprise Commission as the chief of administration for a year, and then also on contract.
All right.
Then after that, I was nominated to represent the Greater Accra region and the National Development Planning Commission, the Governing Council.
Okay.
There I have been, but the tenure ended, and likely to go back and join again for another tenure.
All right, so it's great to have you in the studio, but the conversation we're having started when we discovered that crash barriers at the recently inaugurated Pokuase Interchange had been removed. We visited the site to learn a bit more about how these crash barriers could have been removed that way, and why would anyone actually have the guts to do something like that. It turns out that the thieves were disguised as construction workers, and they stole the items valued at $3,500. So we went to the scene, and we've been speaking. Maxwell Agbagba actually put together this report. Let's watch the story, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation.
It was commissioned by President Akufo-Addo sometime in July this year. Well, many of the residents here were excited when it was commissioned because it reduced the travel time and reduced the traffic congestion, usually in this part of town. Residents we've been speaking to witnessed how the unscrupulous persons stole the crash barriers.
We encountered some people, about 5 people with a truck. And they were working on it. We thought they were working on it. It was at dawn, around 5:30. When we were coming from the church. Yeah. So when we met them, we didn't ask them anything because we thought they were part of the contractors that are working or engineers that are working on the road. So we passed by, but as soon as we got to the entrance of our gate, we saw them moving the car. That means leaving. But we realized that they have removed the thing from that end, where the last metallic pillar is, to the last end there, where they have, fixed the new ones. So they moved. We were here 3 days later. I saw some of the workers in the afternoon walking around and looking at what has taken place. So I confronted them and asked them, I have kids here who used to play around, and I have asked you people to do this for us. And now that you have helped us with it, you have come back to remove it. And the guy told me they were not the people who came to remove it, but it was rather strange people who came in to steal. I was surprised because the way they did the thing, you will not suspect them of stealing. And they did it professionally because the addressing and the way they were walking will not make you suspect anything.
Yeah, we had, they were wearing reflectors.
Yeah, they were wearing reflectors. Reflectors, and some of them were wearing overall, like workers.
Resident engineer of the Pokuase Interchange, Engineer Kwabena Buampon, says the crash barriers that were stolen are valued at a total cost of $3,500. He says they've already picked up signals that some unscrupulous persons want to steal some streetlights on the interchange too.
We observed that about 10 sections of our crash barrier had been stolen or removed by unauthorized or unknown persons. And this is about 40-meter length. And we then proceeded to report to the police, after some time. And you asked about the costs. Presently, it's about $3,500 US. There is an operation or modus operandi of those who steal these streetlights, and what they do is that they start by tampering with their connections, and that virtually plunges the whole system.
All right, so this is just one of the cases that we're talking about. We see these things happening all the time, but hardly do we ever speak up about them. So yesterday, on my way from work, I encountered a situation where there was this policeman who had stopped a taxi, and there was a foam mattress that had dropped on the busy highway, it was on the ring road. This was approaching GBC from the Kanda Total. So the mattress had fallen off this taxi, and the policeman had stopped them, and they were going to get the mattress to put it back on the taxi. The policeman did not allow them to do that and insisted that they got a vehicle that was sizable enough to take the mattress. But can you imagine this taxi, this small taxi with this mattress on top of it? Now let's listen to the passenger who actually stopped the taxi and chartered the taxi, and then we'll come back to continue the conversation.
Me call a pass. I got a mattress. Enti menya car na me fa taxi. Nti ya ba no ya du manu na eto form. Na police say no.
So in short, she says she went to La Paz to buy the mattress. She didn't get in vehicle. She got a taxi, so she put it on the taxi. When they got to the spot, it fell off from the taxi. Now, so as far as she is concerned, yeah, she doesn't think she's done anything wrong. But she is coming from La Paz, and lots of people would have seen her. This mattress could have dropped on another vehicle, forced another vehicle to veer off and crash into another one. There could have been an accident. But nobody did anything about it. I mean, anybody at all could have just stopped the taxi, forced the taxi to stop, and insisted that they got the mattress off it. But that didn't happen until the policeman had to, until the mattress actually came off and the policeman had to intervene. Now, there's another one that Jojo Kobna, the producer, he filmed, and this was on his way home. There's a taxi, you see a street light, as you can see it on your screen right now. So it's broken, and I'm sure probably was on the way, somebody shifted it to the median. But as it is still dangerous, and something has to be done about it. It's going to be there, and somebody could crash into it. Somebody could accidentally, hit or run into it, and it could cause some harm. It could cause an accident, but it has been left there. And the question we're asking this morning is, we tend to see a lot of these things, but we tend not to do anything about it. It is very typical for us to be walking through the streets or driving around town to see that someone has heaped chippings and sand on the road because they're building and they don't have anywhere to put the materials. And yet, people just look on and they go about their business. You can see a concrete mixer driving on the street and pouring concrete onto the street. And nobody is going to stop this vehicle. And yet it's going to destroy the road. Why is it that when we see things, we don't want to say anything about it? Joining me, as I introduced to you earlier, David Annan, is this how we are?
This is a very tough question. This is how we have become.
At what point did we become this?
At the point when, you know, people started thinking that, well, the system is not taking care of me, let me mind my business. Forgetting that if you mind your business and you are not part of getting those who have the propensity to do the wrong thing checked, you are creating a problem for yourself. And that's where we are. I happened to encounter, like you were showing, I encountered a situation one day. You know, because I knew that I have a certain public image, I said, let me be one vigilante and see how I can stop the people who use these sirens. So one day in front of the Town Hotel, you know, airport Roman Ridge. Driving towards the Gold House. There was this man who was coming from my side, but driving on the other side, facing the oncoming vehicle, deciding we wanting the cars coming to stop or even drive onto the pavement for him to have his way. So I got down. And I started asking that four-wheel drive, that Land Cruiser, to drive back, to be reversing. Then the side where I had stopped, the people behind me, when the traffic started moving, they started punking their horn. Beep, 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 you are wasting your time, you are wasting your time, why don't you, are wasting your time, are you the one who to check this one? At that moment, I realized that we are not willing to sacrifice a bit for the kind of system that we want to have. We want to have a good system, but how many of us are willing to sacrifice a bit of our time or our resource or something to make sure that the right things are done? And that's what we have gotten to. People are impatient and not willing to play to any rules now. Probably, I don't know where that bravado comes from, but that's what we see today. And it is not, it's not good. It's not good. From where I have been before, I want to believe that the example of the people who manage the jurisdictions can be a lesson for others people who want to do the wrong thing. Because if they find you doing the right thing, they'll be forced to do the right thing.
To also do the right thing.
If you don't do the right thing, they know that.
All right.
My boss or my master,
yeah,
does it, so I can do it too.
Okay. Let me bring in some others to this conversation. Josephine Nkrumah is the chairperson of the National Commission for Civic Education. She's joining us for the conversation. Good morning to you, Josephine.
Good morning, Israel, and forgive me, my internet is acting up, so I'm having to connect via my phone.
Okay, but we can see you, and you're looking good.
Thank you.
Okay, so we also have the former chairperson of the Commission of Human Rights and Administrative Justice, Emil Short, also joining us on the conversation. Good morning to you, Justice Emil Short.
Listeners, and from Madam Victoria, the NCCE board. Josephine, yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I want to take have your thoughts on this. I'm sure you would have encountered many instances like this where we see things going wrong. The example I use all the time has to do with people sitting in a vehicle, commercial vehicle, and the driver driving recklessly, and yet nobody says anything about it, and then the vehicle can sometimes crash and people die. Hello, Justice Emilshon.
Oh, you want me to respond?
Yeah. So I'm asking.
Yeah, but I think this conversation has arisen because of the reports that some people have stolen crash barriers on the Pokuase Interchange.
Yes.
Yes. And before that, there was a report that some women were pounding fufu on the same interchange.
Yes.
Now, I think that there's too much dishonesty, lawlessness, and indiscipline in our society. And the impunity for which some people commit crimes is also on the increase. Now, with regard to the stealing of these important safety equipment, people have been stealing electric cables from lights on the motorway for quite some time now. And these activities mostly go unpunished. Dishonesty is pervasive in our society. You know, recently I read about several employers complaining about their Ghanaian workers conspiring to steal from them. And some of them have been compelled to dismiss the workers and to replace them with foreigners, thereby worsening the unemployment situation in the country. Also, almost every year, we hear of examination question leakages for the BEC and NCCE examinations. These practices were unheard of in my early school days. So parents, teachers, invigilators, and educational authorities involve the youth in this corrupt activity, and unwittingly, they are encouraging the youth to engage in corruption at a very early stage.
Essentially recruiting them.
Yes, actually, yes. And then it is alleged that some teachers and lecturers sleep with their students for better grades. I mean, the list goes on and on. You know, like you mentioned, so many. And the indiscipline is also goes unchecked. Many motorists without lawful authority install and use sirens on their 4x4 vehicles, drive at reckless speeds, overtaking everyone every day, and endangering the safety of other motorists and passengers who may be crossing the road. Then everyone knows that many motorists and Okada riders who are operating illegally fail to stop when traffic lights have changed to red. And the police seem helpless to deal with these breaches of the traffic regulation. So when criminals can get away with commission of these activities, they'll continue doing so. So failure to enforce our laws, regulations, and bylaws is a major part of the problem in our nation. And I think that the majority of people who engage in these activities have had a poor upbringing. There may be other reasons, and I think maybe the criminologists will be able to assist for us to be able to explain to us why we are witnessing such activities at an alarming rate presently.
All right, thank you. I'd want to bring in the chairperson of the NCCE at this point. So you've heard what Justice Emilshon has had to say, and for him, he feels that this is something that has been simmering, or we have encouraged this for a long time, and that's we're essentially reaping the fruits of our labor in the past.
Thank you. I think that just to disagree to a certain extent with Mr. Emilshon regarding some of these things being unheard of, I think these things have been with us from time immemorial. The question is the frequency with which we see it now, and actually the apathy with which we are treating this. So yes, we do see all of these things and they go unchecked. But previously, you would see this, but as we had more of a sense of a communal spirit, and people thought that what we owned was collective. And to that extent, when somebody sought to destroy something that was seen as communal, communities or persons in the community would rise against you. We are increasingly seeing a more selfish and individualistic society, and largely what I do is my business, and to that extent is no one else's business. And what somebody else does is his or her business, and to that extent is not my business. And so we see a lot of these things. Some of us would rant and rave, but taking that step to correct it has largely gone undone. I think it's also a question of institutions and what role they play in ensuring that these are not done. So institutions that are not being properly resourced and are unable to perform their mandates. So for instance, you'd see this, as we see the street light bent towards the road. You may very well find that a citizen may have reported it, but has the district assembly taken steps to correct it, to repair it? These are some of the questions we should also be asking. I think when we're talking about this, what comes to the fore for me as a civic educator is our rights and responsibilities as citizens. And if you read Article 41 of the Constitution on the duties of a citizen, one cardinal duty of a citizen is to combat the misuse of government or of state property and to protect state property. To what extent do we understand what is state property? And even if we do, we see this kind of misuse or destruction of state property at this level, at the common man's level. But what about misuse and plundering of state resources, state assets, and the public purse, even at a higher level? So it's actually a transcendence of a trait that pervades our society from the top all the way down to the bottom. And it takes a question of revisiting our values as a country to try and unravel some of these things and find some solutions to it. And I have said in the past that it does not matter the amount of investment we put in infrastructural development until we understand that perhaps our greatest investment should go in the human development and social development of our people, of our mindset. Then, like you saw, we will build beautiful roads, put all the street lights, but they will get destroyed. We would build beautiful gutters and we would throw rubbish in it and it will block out drains. And sadly, we'll just see money literally going down the drain. So to my mind, we need to reset our priorities as a nation and begin to intentionally direct investment resources to institutions and the citizen in terms of our mindset transformation and development. Until we get that right, we would not see that kind of national development that would transform our nation. So for me, these are the few words I can share for now.
All right, so when you talk about, resourcing the institutions that will help us reset that mindset, I would want to believe that you're referring to the National Commission for Civic Education. If you had as much resources as you wished, what would you do about it?
Well, I'm referring not only to the National Commission for Civic Education. I'm referring to institutions like the National Commission on Culture. I'm referring to institutions like the Social Welfare Department. I'm even referring also to institutions that have a mandate on certain policies that guide interventions that are necessary to see these changes. But yes, for NCC, what would I say, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, there's only so much we can do. And to the extent of what is given us, that is what we would be able, that is the kind of role we would be able to play. So yes, we do go to all facets of society. We go to in-school youth, we go to youth groups outside of school, we go to different groups, we go to artisanal associations and all of that. But the sustained engagement is what we lack. And when you go and all you do is talk for a little while or engage for a little while, we must understand that these are habits and characters that have been formed over time. It's taking us 60 plus years to see this sort of disintegration of Ghanaian values, if I may put it. And so that kind of engagement must be sustained, it must be deliberate, and there must be the backing of resources to, see this become a success.
Yeah.
The many nations we see, and I like to draw examples with Singapore, where, for instance, in Singapore, the issue of values is taught right from nursery all the way into the tertiary institutions, where the state as the state has actually identified what for them are the critical values that must back their development, and has intentionally taught these values in the face of our people. Today, if you look in our curriculum, there's so many people who complain, we don't see courtesy for boys and girls anymore, we don't see this. But you see, even when you have these things in the schools, even when you have these books in the schools, what kind of teachers do we have? What kind of parenting do we have? We see family systems breaking apart. Streetism is on the increase. So you have largely many children growing up on the streets of Accra and other urban areas, and they don't have anybody to guide them, to protect them, and to lead them into to become responsible citizens.
Yeah.
And these are issues that we must begin to dialogue on critically in going forward, because things can only get worse until we sit down and begin to take very intentional steps about reversing this negative trend that does not augur well for us. You and I may drive in our cars and get home with lights in our homes, but somebody sleeping on the street may not have that facility. Somebody doesn't have a job, and so the person's next intention of survival is, what can I get and sell quickly to make some money? And these questions are very hard questions for us as a country.
Yeah.
And the signs are very clear for us that until we take it as an urgent step, things can only disintegrate further, and it will not augur well for you and I and everybody else in our nation.
I agree. All right, so we have Dr. Charles Reku Brobe, who's a former chief executive of VRA and now has an NGO called GIPO. He's also joined the conversation. Good morning to you, Dr. Charles Reku Brobe. And for me, the question I would want to ask you is, what gives us that audacity, or what gives one that audacity to want to go and vandalize state property and think that they can actually get away with it?
Well, I don't think it's vandalization. It's actually mostly organized theft. So the audacity is that people have been stealing state property for many years, and nothing has been done about it. I mean, I recall that when I did Ghana 50, we lit up the whole of Accra, and within a month of the event, every street light that had been rehabilitated, including the independence flood lighting, was gone. I mean, this is not something people vandalizing. They're actually stealing. We had the same problem with the N1 when it was first opened and all the street lights were stolen. And I believe so this is not something that is vandalism. It's clearly organized theft. Because we have an iron industry where we don't actually mine iron ore, and we pretend that we're feeding all these factories with scrap. And what is actually happening is that infrastructure that are put in to try and brighten up and light up our streets and make them safe are immediately turning to scrap. Of course, there are two sources. There's the organized theft, and then there's the petty theft of people who are clearly having hard times to deal with their economic situation. And you see in the middle of roads, the coverage of manholes are taken away very regularly as they are replaced. And this is not a new problem. At least I have witnessed it at least for the last 20 years. And the real problem is that why isn't anybody taking time to investigate it? We have a security system, we have the National Investigation Bureau and all the other things. And we seem not to be tackling this problem. I mean, I can tell you a story. I remember when we did Ghana 50, the lights in front of the National Security Office at the ministry were stolen within 3 days, and nothing happened.
But the question I also want to ask is it that people don't see this happening, and why won't they talk about it when they see it happening?
Well, people see it happening, but then this is where the whole idea of citizenry comes in. You know, you see people in the middle of the day pretending to be working on street lights, etc., etc. And, you know, there is no desire or any system that says, well, can we actually call ECG and check whether people have been asked to work on this, or people just look at it and go by. So there's no education or on what citizens should do to protect public property when they still being stolen. So that is a problem in terms of citizens' education. But I don't think the problem is essentially, it's an organized thievery that must be stopped, by and large. So, you see guardrails being taken down, you see anything that qualifies as quote, scrap, that feeds the iron industry is taken away.
Could it also be that we don't know who to call, apart from approaching these people and confronting them?
Well, I think that's one of the problems, because if I ask who is actually in charge of the management of urban roads and the streets, by law, I think ECG is supposed to be in charge of the maintenance of street lights, etc., etc. But at what point do contractors hand over, and who do they hand over to, and what steps are in place to ensure that newly constructed infrastructure which are handed over are being protected? I mean, I have heard a lot about 5 different systems of cameras which are operating in Accra by different people. I'm not sure whether they are all concentrated in the same place or there are any on the major street, whether
I seem to have lost Dr. Charles Rekrubo. I'll bring the conversation to the studio. Mr. Anand, you're a former mayor. Who should we report to? Which institution should we report to if we see some of these things? If we see a street light that's broken, if we see somebody wanting to remove crash barriers, who do we call?
Thank you. Within every jurisdiction, within every assembly's catchment area, we have a works department. If anybody finds anything wrong within a particular area, you could call to the assembly And if we call the assembly has representatives of all these institutions, roads, be it highways or urban roads or feeder roads, electricity, ECG is almost everywhere. So from the assembly, the works department can liaise with them and get whatever the problem is fixed.
But the assembly, how many people actually know where the assembly is to even get to know the number they can reach the assembly on?
That's a very, very good statement. I think when Josephine spoke, she talked about, education of people. We don't seem to be bothered about many things until we get into a problem. Then we realize that we don't even know. But people must be willing to know what to do and when to do it. Okay? If you live within an area and you know that you are likely to get sick, and you don't know where you can find a pharmacy shop maybe to get a first aid or a health center within the area, then you have a problem. So the same way, these are things which assemblies are the people who need to handle. And therefore, everybody living within every particular area, you should know where the assembly is. And I think that should be the first place where you could call. And of course, it also behooves on the assemblies also probably put signs in the various locations. Times have changed. I was there about some 20 years ago, and I think the paradigm has shifted a bit.
The social media now.
The social media is there. So they should also put up some information around the places telling people, if you find anything like this, report, call this number, or walk to this location. And that can also help in getting some of these problems solved on time.
Yeah. Now, Dr. Charles Rekubobe is back on the line. So you were suggesting what we should do about getting some of these things reported.
Well, yes, first of all, just back following on from what your guest has said.
That's David Annan, by the way, former MC.
Oh, David from Tema. Okay. First of all, there's no proactivity. The councils are not taking steps to inform the public. I heard David say they should get to know. How do they get to know if they are not informed? I'll tell you, Israel, the few times I've corresponded with my council, the one thing that I noticed on their letterhead is that there isn't even a telephone number to call anybody to follow up. Deliberately, they don't put phone numbers on their things. And so I think, we need to, first of all, make sure that the councils have the capacity. We have decimated so many councils into little units, which I don't think really are effective. If you see a problem in Accra, where do you talk to AMA and where do you talk to Ayawasu and where do you talk to somebody else? So there needs to be knowledge about how to be a good citizen, provided by both the councils, the electricity corporation, which has got responsibility, the police, the security system, etc. If that is provided and then people don't respond, then you can say we have irresponsible citizens. But until you get them properly informed on how to act, I'm sorry, you can't blame the citizens.
Dr. Charles Rekubobe, is our situation, can we salvage the situation, or probably it's too late? Because we're talking about a value system that should actually also start from the home.
Well, I don't think it starts from the home. Israel, I think the basic problem here is organized theft. And I think we should see it as that. I think the petty things of people removing, let's say, nameplates or house plates from outside houses, that I think is a problem of one of the hardships that we're having to deal with, because people are finding it difficult to make ends meet. I think there's a place for good upbringing at home, but there's also a place for letting the citizen know what their responsibilities and their rights and obligations are. I didn't hear too much of what Josephine said, but the NCCE is the most under-resourced organization that we have in this country. But this brief actually is very, very clear that it should tell us how to be good citizens. But if we're not giving any money to the NCCE to organize programs that makes us good citizens in terms of our rights, obligations, and expectations, well, who caused them? I don't think we should say everything begins at home.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Charles Reku-Brobe. We will continue the conversation, but at any point in time, if there's anything else you'd want to add, we would love to hear you out. But I'd go to the chairperson of the National Commission for Civic Education. So is it just a matter of resource, or there's something that you could actually do without or within the limited resources that you have?
Well, our mandate is to educate the citizenry on their rights and responsibilities, on the principles and objectives of the Constitution, and therein lies the duties of a citizen, as well as ultimately what we do to sustain Ghana's democracy. Within the confines or constraints of our own resources, we've undertaken programs over the years that have evolved to accommodate what resources we have and how we reach the citizenry. And so, for instance, most of our strategies have changed, where previously where we would go to the citizenry, previously would organize various fora for various facets of society. Not having those kind of resources, we now go to the citizenry to meet them where they organize their own fora and use the various fora to educate them. We are leveraging also on social media a lot these days. And so if you go on our various social media handles, we also engage the citizenry through that medium. And of course, we use the traditional media as well to educate the citizenry, and within the districts of the various regions, we have some radio stations that give us slots, but curiously, those with the largest listenership are the ones that we find difficult to break through in terms of reaching the citizenry through educational programs using orthodox media. Having said that, these days, one of the key platforms we also use is the churches and mosques. We use those platforms because Ghanaians throng in their numbers to churches and mosques for their spiritual growth or nourishment, and we use those platforms working closely with the clergy and the imams team, the various imams teams, to reach the citizenry. But I think largely the biggest constraint of the NCCE, which perhaps is not even peculiar to NCCE, is a matter of resources. That being said, it's also equally important for us to understand the vast expectation of Ghanaians on the Commission in terms of mindset transformation to serve as a catalyst for development and the sustenance of our democracy. And so, as I said earlier, I'd just like to reiterate that point, that it's essential at this point that we understand that on the investment we make in infrastructure is never well served if you don't have a citizenry that understand their role in protecting the kind of resource that has been made available for our collective benefit. It's also important to point out that the laws in this country must work. We are a country that has so many laws, but the implementation and enforcement of the laws has also been a challenge for us. when we begin to prosecute these cases vigorously and putting it out in the public space, it would serve as a deterrent. Dr. Brobe spoke about organized theft of some of our state resources. That is true. There was a video that went viral some time ago on persons who were actually supplying scrap, in quotes, to factories and to foreign, and these factories are manned by foreigners. And you could tell that a lot of it was not scrap in the true sense of the word, but actually things that had been literally taking off state assets, state property, and sent into these factories as scrap. What happened after that? Did we hear of any prosecution? If there was prosecution, it did not really come to the public space, and so it does not serve as a deterrent. And all of these things actually add to the impudence and audacity with which some of us behave, because they know that they can do it and actually get away unpunished.
Yeah.
And when we begin to punish, then people will begin to sit up and understand that there are real consequences backed by law for these acts of theft.
Yeah. Now, talking about punishment, enforcing the laws and punishment, I'm not sure if anyone reports a case, and I'm putting this to you, Mr. Annan, if anyone reports something they've observed. For instance, you see stones heaped on the road and obstructing traffic. If you see something like this and report it to a policeman, do you really think that the policeman is going to take it up and try and ensure that whoever did that addresses it, or the policeman is likely to say, maybe it's not my call, or I'm on another assignment, and so I can't be bothered with this?
Well, I'm not too sure whether it's the police who should do that, but of course the police are to enforce laws and regulations. So if there's a regulation that debars anybody from heaping sand on the road, then they can. But otherwise, I think it's an obstruction of a highway or a road, and so it would be within the remit of the assembly, and for that matter, an institution like the roads department or the the roads department within that jurisdiction, which needs to be reported to, and then they and the police can work together to make sure that the right thing is done.
But would it also help if we identify some people in society, as citizen vigilantes, who come up and bring up an issue and confront people like these?
Yes, it can help. I think we have all alluded to the fact that we are becoming too individualistic in our country today. Everybody says, let me stay in my one corner. Well, because whatever I do, nobody really follows up, and therefore, but of course, people must be interested in having the right things done. Because if you don't talk about the heap of sand in the road, and maybe you'll be very careful, but a friend, a brother or a sister or somebody else related to you might get killed because of that. So we need to show interest in having the right things corrected, the wrong things corrected, so that we all have, live within the sanitized environment. Because the situation that we are facing now, as we are all discussing, is very pathetic. Now, for a sand in the street, first, I think the one who put it there must be charged for obstruction. And I think, I'm not a lawyer, maybe Josephine can help us, but I think an obstruction, it can be cited as a crime. Because if you put it there and you are impeding the flow of traffic, of course, you must be charged for that. And I think, the law should be able to, provide on how such people will be handled.
And again, the assembly should come in at this point, because if the if you're putting up a structure, if you're buying stones and you're going to build, doesn't the assembly have the responsibility to ensure that you have a place where your materials will go so that you can go ahead with the construction without obstructing traffic and causing inconvenience to other people?
Yes, the assemblies actually have the responsibility to give somebody the permission to do whatever he wants to do. You could buy a land, but also the kind of property you build there, it must be determined by the assembly.
And how you go about it.
And how you go about it. And even if they approve the plan that you want to build, continuously they have to come and supervise and make sure that you are complying with all the regulations that guide the development of that property. But I think you find it now that in many of the assemblies, they don't have what it takes to supervise these things as they develop. Our townships are sprawling faster than the resources available to some of the assemblies. Of course, places like Tema could handle it at that time because they are a little more resourceful than many of the other places. But even that notwithstanding, they still had a problem. They still have a problem of the people going continuously to make sure that the people are working according to the plan, And I also want to think that our punishment for these wrongdoings are not punitive enough. They are not punitive enough.
Is there punishment at all? Because if you go and report that someone has heaped stones on the road, what exactly will happen to that person? Maybe let me ask Josephine Nkrumah, do you know of any punishment for someone who has heaped stones on the road and obstructing traffic and inconveniencing other people?
I believe we have bylaws that speak to the issue of anything that obstructs traffic, and therefore, of course, there are fines. Usually, there are fines that go with it for anyone who flouts those bylaws. And so, you cannot just on your own accord obstruct traffic or any public thoroughfare or access road and think that it's okay because it suits your convenience. And if you choose to do so, you must seek the permission of the district assembly before you can do that. And that's why you have usually when people are conducting certain social gatherings and they need to use the street in front of their residence or that sort of thing, they must seek for a permit before they do that, because you are basically obstructing access routes to other users of that common user facility.
Yeah.
And so
do people still do that? Do they actually seek permission for blocking roads for their funerals? I doubt they still do.
I'm not certain, and perhaps it's something that somebody from the district assemblies or municipal assemblies can speak to. But I think that they still go to the assemblies to seek that permission before they carry out that activity. Because I think when they don't, and it comes to the attention of the assembly, they are quickly called to order to do so. As to how rigorous it is done, I'm not in a position to say, but I know that there are rules and regulation. For that matter, there are bylaws that are specifically that have been specifically formulated for this purpose.
Okay, so this is a conversation we can continue having, but I would want us to wrap it up by taking some comments, some final comments from you on the way forward. How can we quickly address the situation where we're going to have citizens who speak up a lot more when they see some of these things going wrong? And where do we start?
Well, I think for me, and I said this earlier, it's about putting our money where our mouths are. We must begin to resource or invest in our human capital, in our mindset development. And until we do that, we will be pouring money down the drains in terms of infrastructural development if you do not have commensurate investment in the mindset of the Ghanaian. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Josephine Nkrumah is the chairperson of the National Commission for Civic Education. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I'd end with you, Mr. Anand. So I'm asking that same question. Where do we start?
Thank you.
It's a whole.
It's a hydra. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a hydra-headed, problem. But I think from within every assembly, we should start putting up some educational messages. Maybe they sponsor 1, 2, or a couple of billboards telling people what to do. Don't be a passive citizen. Report whatever you see. Call to this number.
They must share their phone numbers.
Share certain numbers that they need to call to, or offices that they can walk to. If they find certain things not going right and they want to report. And I think that can be the beginning, And then in the past, we used to have few educational adverts put up. Those were the days when we had only a GBC. But now Joy and all the rest are in there. So you should all be part of the educational program on what people really must do. And when you find something not going right, call these numbers, do this. And I think that can be the beginning. But because, and we should all accept that being very individualistic and not being interested in the things that are happening around you will not take us anywhere.
Yeah.
We need to be interested. You must be each other's keeper. We need to be very interested in the things that are happening around us. That's the only way we can solve the problems around us.
Okay. Now, one other thing that I keep wondering about has to do with accidents when they happen. And these vehicles crash into infrastructure, state property, so crash barriers. They destroy them. Who's supposed to pay for them?
Thank you. When you crash into those accessories around the roads,
we have traffic lights, we have street lights that are damaged because the vehicles run into them during accidents.
In fact, whoever causes the damage needs to pay for it. If you run your car into a traffic light, you are liable to pay. And because since it's an accident, it gets reported to the police. Except in situations where people hit and then the blind side of everybody and then they drive their cars away, then it becomes a problem for the state. But that notwithstanding, while the police are working with you on it, it should be possible, electricity company or the assemblies work on it so that the street light get fixed. If it's any of those accessories on the road, the assemblies and the roads department work on it to get it fixed, because it will serve other people and not only the one who created the problem. But the one who creates the problem must pay for it. In fact, I want to believe that if you have a comprehensive insurance on your car and you run into another car, the insurance pays for it.
Yeah.
So if you have an insurance on your car and it's an accident, I guess the insurance should pay for it. I don't know what the loss is, but common sense tells me that if you run your car into another car and your insurance can cover it up, then the same way, the insurance should be able to pay for this one. But the lawyers, the insurer, and the insurance agents will be able to tell us. But my common sense tells me that if I have a comprehensive insurance on my car and I run it into another car, I pay. The insurance pays for it and pays. So these things can be exploited, but the one who runs his car into any of these facilities, public facilities, must pay for it.
All right. So yes, this conversation is, as I indicated, is something we should keep having. We need to be aware of our rights and responsibilities as citizens. And for me, I feel that all of us must be, well, as the president said, citizens and not spectators. So we see something, we say something, and we have to ensure that things are done right. yes, we would feel that maybe I can't be bothered. It's not about me. But as I keep saying on the show this morning, in Ghana we say, Moko sanile, Moko saneni. So anything that concerns anybody concerns all of us. Thank you very much, Mr. David Annan, for joining us in the studio for this conversation. I also want to say thank you to the chairperson of the NCCE, Josephine Nkrumah, for joining us for the conversation. Dr. Charles Rekubrobe of GIPO also spoke with us. And then Justice Emil Short, former Commissioner of the Commission for Human Rights and Administrative Justice. Thank you all for your time. But let's continue having these conversations in our homes and out there. We should encourage each other to stop wrongdoing or speak up when we see something not going right. Otherwise, before we know...
Just like you said, we have an adage, you say, the sheep, as meek and humble as it says. You know, it says it doesn't care, so whatever, it must lie. But when it gets to the time for the sacrifice, they use the sheep. So if you behave like the sheep and you are so humble and you see everything and you don't talk, by the time the suffering will come, it might come to you. So when you see something which is not going right, speak out.
Thank you. See something, say something. Stay tuned in. There's more coming up on the AM show, and I'll be back with you in a bit.